Hello, I'm Liselle Sambury, a soon-to-be traditionally published author, and today's video is all about joining the writing community and how to find CPs and beta readers, but also how to make writer friends. So I decided to put these together because sometimes I feel like these two things of like finding critique partners and making friends in the writing community can often go hand in hand. So I figured I would put them into one video. So I'm gonna talk first about the beta reader CP stuff, and then I'll talk about the writer friend stuff. But right now I'm just gonna start with a quick introduction, and everything will have timestamps below, so if you want to jump around, you can feel free to jump around. But as a little introduction to why I'm talking about this topic, so I joined the writing community like 8 years ago. I was 22 and I had just gotten back into reading, and I became a book blogger, and through becoming a book blogger I became involved in the writing community and entrenched in it. And I always talk about how finding that community and making those friends within the writing community was a huge reason for why I kept going with writing, that propelled me forward to keep trying to pursue my dream of being published. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this and do a little bit of how to based on my experience, just to help out other people who are really wanting to join in the community and aren't really sure where to start, or they've tried before and maybe they feel like they didn't get the experience that they wanted to and are looking for ways to try again. And so that's really what this video is all about. So we'll move straight on to the finding CPs and betas. In the interest of anyone who is not sure about the terms beta readers and critique partners, I'm just going to define that really quick. So based on my knowledge, I know some people have slightly different definitions, but to me, beta readers are people who read your work where there's no exchange implied. So they aren't reading necessarily with the idea in mind that you are going to swap manuscripts. Sometimes they're not even writers themselves, they might just only be readers, and so they're doing that reading for you. I know some people will do different levels and they have things like alpha readers, or they might call someone a beta reader even if there's no swap involved, but this is just how I learned it, and that's how I think of it. Versus a critique partner, who is someone who you regularly swap works with. So you read their work and they read your work. And sometimes you'll go into these partnerships and people will say up front, I'm looking for a beta reader, thus in my mind implying no swap. Or a critique partner, which in my mind implies a swap of work. And I would say that I think that critique partner relationships and beta reader relationships can both be equally strong. I don't really think one is necessarily better than the other. They're just two different types of relationships. So early on in my writing career, I looked for a lot of critique partners because I found it was easier in writing communities to find people when you were doing that exchange, that swap. And then beta readers was something that I found I developed later on when I made friends with people, and I would be like, hey, do you want to read the book and let me know what you think? In which case I had more beta reader relationships. I've also had beta reader relationships that turn into critique partnerships. It really runs the gambit. How do you find these beta readers or critique partners? There are all different sorts of ways that people do this, and I'll kind of go through examples of how you can find these people, and then I'll talk a bit more about establishing that relationship and best practices and that whole thing. So to begin with, finding beta readers or critique partners. Using social media is a great way to do this. This is how I have done this in the past. I've done all sorts of different things. I have tweeted and just been like, here, this is what my book is about. If you're interested in being a beta reader or swapping, being a critique partner, send me a message, send me a DM, and we'll go from there. I've done that. I've gone to writer forums and I've posted in a critique partner section. I used to use Agent Query Connect, those forums, and I would post there in that critique section. And that's been some avenues that I've used. Some other things that I have used to find beta readers or critique partners has been when I have made friends in the writing community, which is why I've linked these together. Once I've made friends and I've known someone and I know that they write or they read similar things to the project I'm working on, I've also just directly reached out to them and said, hey, would you be interested in reading my book, and going from there. There are also some specific programs that are meant in particular to help you match up. On Twitter, there is the hashtag CP match. And I know also this past year in author mentor match that some of the mentors were also doing CP matches as part of that. And that rolls neatly into my next place for where you can find CPs or betas, and that's in mentorship or competition communities. So mentorship contests like Pitch Wars, like Author Mentor Match, those sorts of mentorships often have their own communities. I know these can be on Facebook or these can be on Slack, etc. But these hopeful communities, they're usually called, like you're a Pitch Wars hopeful. And when you join these communities, you're meeting and you're talking to lots of people that are all trying to do the same thing. They're wanting to submit to this contest. And those are also great places where you can meet people, you can make connections, and you can also reach out to people when you know they have a similar story to you and say, hey, would you want to swap work? So there's really like a plethora of places that you can look for CPs and betas, and I would say that basically the two methods are distilled down to you putting yourself out there like wide and being like, hey, this is my book, is anyone interested? Or you specifically asking people, I would say, is the two styles. Now on to some best practices. So these are things that I would recommend that you do when you are trying to create these CP and beta relationships, partially to protect yourself and your time, but also partially to help you create the best kind of relationship possible. So the first thing that I would suggest, and I've suggested this in previous videos, is that when you swap work, if you're doing a swap relationship, that you only swap the first chapter to begin with. This is for a number of reasons. For one, it's to see that they meet the timeline. So if you say, hey, we're going to swap chapters, we're going to get back to each other in 2 weeks, you want to know that they're going to adhere to that and they're going to get back to you in 2 weeks. Or if they can't, that they're going to communicate with you and say, hey, I can't make this deadline. What about this time? It's in case you don't like it, in case you don't like their work or they don't like your work, to be frank. And so at that point, you can kind of decide whether you want to move forward with the relationship or not. And it's in your best interest on both parties if something isn't working for you to pull out at that point. And three, it's so you get a sample of their critique style. Do you like it? Do you find what they're saying is helpful? And honestly, are they being mean? Because sometimes you get into a situation where someone's comments are just mean, they're not helpful. And it's best that you find that out with a first chapter swap than you find that out after they've gone through your entire manuscript. You know, that's just kind of like the base way. And all of these things go two ways, really. But that's why I recommend doing just the first chapter to begin with. Sometimes when I've known people, I've been like, yeah, for sure, the whole manuscript. It really is up to you. But I think if you're starting out in this and you're starting out trying to find your first critique swaps and that sort of thing, it's really best to just start with that first chapter and see how it goes. And of course, if things don't vibe with you, then that is the time to say, hey, I don't think this is going to work out. And I know it's awkward. It's very awkward to tell someone, hey, I don't really think we're going to be a good fit for this. But it's better that you tell them than that you waste each other's time. Because if you don't like their story and you force yourself to read it anyway, they're not going to get the same sort of critique that they would get from someone who's really invested in the story and is trying really hard to help them figure out how to make it better, and vice versa for you. And at this time, I'm also going to talk a little bit about stealing of work, because I know this is something that a lot of writers have a lot of fear about. I know this is what stops a lot of people from finding beta readers or CPs in the first place. I'm the sort of person where I feel like even if someone jacks your story, they're never going to do it the same way that you do it. But I know there are some circumstances in which that can be really difficult, like, you know, someone that's closer in the publication process than you might be may be able to jack a very unique concept from your story. I know people have their own personal feelings separate from how I feel about worrying about someone taking your work. There's no 100% guarantee to safeguard yourself from that, but for me, some things that I think are helpful is seeing how this person that you are potentially going to exchange work with, how they interact with other people. So if you've met them on like a social media platform like Twitter or something, there's no harm in going and seeing how they're interacting with other people. You know, if they're having positive interactions. Of course, someone can have positive interactions with other people and still be a story stealer. But I just feel like these are some surface ways that you can kind of feel a little bit more reassured. This is also the great thing, and you know, this is why I'm lumping this together with talking about writer friendships, is that if you are friends with someone, you are much more able to trust them. Hopefully you're friends with them because you trust them, and so then the fear of that work stealing becomes a lot lower versus, you know, if this is someone who's a near stranger to you. That's not to say that people who are near strangers to you can't be great CPs. I've had over 10 CPs and betas over my time, you know, writing books and being in this community, and I've never had anything stolen from me. But yeah, that's kind of what I would say if you're wanting to find ways to protect yourself and that sort of thing. I don't have anything to say about copyright. That's really not my thing. I can't advise whether or not you should go and get a copyright or things like that or how that works. But those are kind of the off the top of my head ways that you can try and safeguard yourself against those sorts of things if that's something you're really worried about. Now I'm going to go ahead and talk about how to make writer friends. As I talked about a little bit before, I do think this still wraps into the whole CP and beta thing, because I think a lot of times the friends that you make in the writing community can also potentially be people who can beta read your work or who can become your critique partners. Not every friend will be like that, because you may write vastly different things and it may just not work that way. But I think that having a friend that then evolves into a beta reader or critique partner or vice versa is a really common thing. And so I think this can all go together. But I'll start with the most obvious bit to me about making writer friends, which is where to find these friends. And social media is a huge place, you know, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and what have you. I can really only speak to Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube because those are the platforms that I used to make writer friends. I know there are other platforms. There's platforms like TikTok, and what's that new one? Oh, there's a new one where you like talk and stuff. I can't remember what it's called. But there are all sorts of different social media platforms. There's also online forums and those sorts of things where you can find different friends. I don't know if people still use Facebook groups, but those are still a thing. But I'm going to talk primarily about Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube and how to go forward with that. Editing Liselle here, so I realized after the fact that I only talked about making writer friends online. I didn't talk about making friends IRL as it would be. This is because I have made almost all of my writer friends starting online, and then we later met in person. It's not something that's common for me to have met them in person first and then continued a friendship online. And so that's why I just naturally didn't even think to talk about it. And I think also because it's COVID times, it also hasn't really been salient or top of mind. But most of my experience has been starting online, and sometimes I'll meet them in real life. And there are some people that I've met in conferences, or I've met just because I met up with other friends IRL and they were there, and then we became friends that way. So that's kind of my insert for why I didn't talk about that. That's really most of my experience is starting those relationships online. And so all of my discussion of this is about online stuff. Maybe in the future, if I develop more of a friendship making in real life at book events, and it's safe to go to book events and that sort of thing again, maybe I'll revisit that in the future. So just as a note for you going forward. The first thing I would say is to start interacting. This is really the easiest way to start that process of making writer friends. So, commenting on people's YouTube videos, joining live streams and chatting with people in the chat, commenting on people's tweets, commenting on people's Instagram posts or Instagram stories, those sorts of things. Just commenting. And again, you want to do this not just haphazardly, in the same way. I don't know, maybe this is different for different people, but I wouldn't just like make friends with absolutely anyone that came by. There are people whose content you're genuinely interested in, whose content you generally enjoy, even if their content is like posting funny dog memes. It doesn't matter. Those are the people that you're wanting to interact with, because those are people you think you will potentially be friends with, and just starting with that commenting and going from there. And I will say this is a two-way street. So you want these people to also be commenting back on your stuff, because it shows that they're also interested in your content and what you are bringing to the table. If you are having a one-way street where only you are commenting on a person's thing and they never interact with your stuff, that's probably a person that's not really going to become your friend, because they're not engaging with you in a meaningful way. It has to be both ways. And so that's what I would say for that. And of course, as you get that back and forth communication going, there will be people that you interact with more often than others. I will say there is a difference between being friendly with someone and being friends with someone. Sometimes there will be a lot of people that you will be friendly with, which is the case for me personally as well, but not everybody you are friends with. And I think when you're wanting to make that leap, this is my suggestion, but I make this suggestion with the caveat that this is going to be a person that you have had a lot of interaction, back and forth mutual interaction with, is that you can try the slip into the DMs. So this is a lot easier on Instagram, I find, because when you reply to people's Instagram stories, you are automatically put into their direct messages or their private messages, and you can start a back and forth from there. And if you are having a meaningful back and forth in that direct message, that private closed message sector, then it's a lot easier for you to become friends. For something like Twitter, it's a little bit different, because you are sliding unsolicited into someone's DMs to see how that goes. And from that point, you really do have to gauge it. I know social cues can be hard for some people, and that can be really difficult, but I always try and think of that back and forth communication. Are you having meaningful back and forth discussions where like you write a block of text and they also write a block of text, not just you writing blocks of text and them doing single word answers, a really meaningful connection. And so that's why I say about this two-way street, because if you are the only person participating in the friendship, then it's not a friendship. I know people that do have friendships like that. I don't see those as meaningful friendships or those as positive friendships. To me, if you're friends with someone, it's give and take. You're not the only person giving and you're not the only person taking. You are both contributing to a mutual relationship with each other. On the other hand, it might not only be you going and trying to interact with people. There may be people who see you and are trying to interact with you, and you're being open to those sorts of interactions, because it may not necessarily always be you being like, okay, I'm trying to be friends with people. People might also be trying to be friends with you. And so I would say be open to those opportunities as well, if that's something you're interested in. And the thing about human nature and people, not everyone's going to want to be your friend, and you're not going to want to be everyone's friend. And that's perfectly fine. It's really up to you to establish those boundaries. And speaking of boundaries, you cannot force a friendship with someone. Sometimes there are people that you really admire. You might admire them as like an author or a writer. You might really just admire them as a content person. Like you think their tweets are so funny and you love the stuff they post on Instagram, and you like keep track of all of their stuff, and you feel very much like you know them and that you should definitely be friends. You're like, we have all this stuff in common, we should be friends. But if you are messaging that person and they are kind of responding seldom or not really responding, then to me, that is a sign that they are not trying to create the same type of relationship with you that you are trying to create with them. In which case, you can't force that. You can't make that person want to be your friend. If they're happy to communicate with you in a friendly way, by all means, continue your friendly communication. But I wouldn't like put all your eggs into that basket. I wouldn't get personally affected by it. You know, I think it's natural that if you really wanted to be friends with someone and you get the feeling they don't want to be friends with you, to feel a little bit sad at first, but that's fine. Feel your feelings and move on through it. Don't get obsessed. Don't latch on. Don't get so focused that you are missing out on potential friendships with people that do want to be friends with you because you are so fixated on like those few people or couple people or whatever. This is a time where I share a little personalness. There have been people who I've really wanted to be friends with who have not wanted to be friends with me, and that is fine. There are people who I've tried to create relationships with that kind of falls flat and it doesn't really end up being a friendship, and that's fine. There are people who I'm friendly with who are not like my friends. They're just people I'm friendly with. And that's fine. All of that is fine. I also want to say, I want to talk about time, because I feel like this is something that I don't see often mentioned. When I do see it mentioned, I'm like, yes, but I don't often see it mentioned. And that is the time period it takes to form these relationships. I will say that when I joined the writing community, for me to make a friend that was someone I talked to in my DMs, was back and forth. We were in a mutual friendship. We both liked talking to each other about all sorts of things. I trusted them and I felt I could tell them stuff, personal things that I wouldn't have necessarily just thrown on my Twitter or Instagram or what have you. It took me years to do that. Years. I did not establish those relationships right away, and that was years of me sometimes making connections with people that I was like, maybe we'll be friends, but then we just ended up kind of being surface level friendly. Those were through CP and beta things that like kind of we exchanged work, but then we didn't really talk. We weren't really chatty with each other. It wasn't a friendship. It was really more professional in that we exchanged work and that was it. Through doing all of that, years to make that sort of writer friendship. And then once I had established that one, because I'd spent so much time kind of getting to know different people, over time I had more and more and more and more and more. And so I mention that because I feel like sometimes you can come into a community and you can see people with like what feel like established close friendships, and you're like, oh wow, I like wish I had friends like that. And you can try and it doesn't happen right away, or it doesn't happen quickly, and you can feel like, what am I doing wrong? Like, what is happening? Why can't I create these same friendships of other people? Like, is it that people are purposely like shutting me out, or like these groups are like, are they just like cliquey, and like that's why I can't find any group like that? And why is this so hard for me? And it can be really easy to kind of get down on yourself and to feel really sad and feel like you tried to become a part of this community that everybody talks about being so welcoming, but you don't feel like you're welcomed in it. And that's why I talk about that time period, because it takes time. And I'm the sort of person where it's always taken me time to make friends anyway. I remember when I started high school, I used to hang out in the park alone for the first full month of school before I like got up the courage to, you know, ask someone their name and like try and introduce myself and try and actively make a friend. You know, I I've spent times in workplaces where I've worked at places for several years, and I've never had a coworker that I considered an actual friend. So perhaps with me and my experience, I had been used to IRL, it taking a long time for me to make those connections anyway. So when I came into the writing community, it wasn't any different. And I was really thankful for the little interactions, like the friendly interactions I had with other people, even if they weren't deep friendships yet. And so that's why I mentioned this, because I think especially if you're a person that like IRL, it's really easy for you to make those sorts of friendships. When you come into an online community, it can be really difficult if it takes longer than that time to make those sorts of connections. And that's not to say that that's everyone. I'm sure there are people who like stroll onto like Twitter and Instagram and like make besties super fast. But if that's not you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that doesn't mean that you will never achieve that. Even when I came onto Authortube after like already being in a writing community on Twitter, it took me months to get to the point where I was in, DMs with other Authortubers beyond just like commenting on their videos. That was a thing that happened over months of time. I definitely did not stroll onto the scene with all sorts of friends. And I would say really the place that was the fastest in like making connections would be Instagram, because of that DM feature. Because when you respond to people's Instagram stories, you're automatically put in a private chat. So I would say that was something where it was faster to make those sorts of friendships with people because you had that much access. Kind of right off the bat. So yeah, that's why I wanted to talk about time, because if you've been in a community for a couple months and you're like, why can't I make any like friends that like feel like real friends? Totally fine. It doesn't mean that you won't achieve that. It may just take a little bit longer. I'd also like to take a note, the same as I did with the CPs and betas, about protecting yourself. Especially I know in light of things, that came out on Twitter about authors bullying other authors and that sort of thing. I talked about this briefly in a vlog to basically say like there are still lots of good people out there, and to have that encouragement. But I do also want to, in this video as well, talk about protecting yourself. When you are in a friendship with someone, they should not be putting you down. Anyone that is your friend that like wants to say stuff like tell you your work is shit, who says things regularly that make you feel like crap, a person who regularly will pop up just to ask you for stuff and then otherwise is completely absent, a person who does not celebrate your wins with you, who makes your wins about them maybe not feeling good about not having those, a person who also has no time for you when you are having a downtime, because in the same vein, you can our lives are ups and downs, and your friends should be there for the ups and the downs. And a person who wants to opt out of one or the other without any like word to you, that's not really a friend, in my opinion. I know sometimes people, if like there's a lot of stuff that's down and they're not in the mental headspace and they have to pull back, but when I have friends like that, they tell me, hey, I'm having a really hard time mentally and I need to pull back for a while. And that's fine. People should and can set their own boundaries. I'm really just talking about people that treat you badly are not your friends. And I know if you might be listening to this and you might think, well, isn't that obvious? And it's not always obvious, especially if you are already in that relationship. And as someone who has previously had a toxic friendship, even if you're aware that someone is treating you poorly, if you have, memories of things that are good, or if that is kind of one of the few friends that you have. For example, when I was communicating with that person who is a toxic friend, I had 2 writer friends. And that person was one of them. And it was really difficult for me to reconcile losing my like one other close writer friend because they had like said some they had like done some like nasty, shady stuff. But that's part of protecting yourself. You don't need toxic, negative people in your space. So that's definitely something I would say when you are navigating these friendships. I would also, off the back of that, say to be open when you are warned about someone. This is a little bit of a trickier line because it's, you know, it's a he said, she said sort of thing, but I think it's important to kind of keep an open mind if someone who you trust has taken the time to say, hey, this person that I see you interacting with, this is some negative things that I've heard about them. I think it's important to pay attention to that because whisper networks, especially within writing communities and author communities, exist for a reason. And they exist because people are trying to help protect each other in spaces in which it's unsafe to say things openly. But again, it's that whole thing of like, you kind of got to trust your gut and you got to decide what's like hearsay and what you feel rings true to you. But I would just say, I think it's important to be open to when those things are brought up to you versus just like immediately shutting it down, because you may find that that was a person that was actually trying really hard to protect you. So yeah, that's my last word about that. That's all I have to say about how to make writer friends and finding CPs and betas. I really hope that helped you if you were kind of wondering how to get into the community, if you were in the process of trying to join and feeling maybe down on it or just feeling confused or not really sure where to go with things. I really hope this has been helpful for you. I'm very passionate about the writer community. It's been such a huge part of me becoming an author and achieving this and staying in this community, but also feeling encouraged and inspired and supported and like having fun. And I still have my ups and downs. You know, I have moments where I get into new writing community situations and I feel nervous or scared, or I have a social interaction that kind of leaves me upset. And I think those are just kind of natural within the way that life is. But at large, I think this is such a fantastic, wonderful community, and I think there are so many pockets that you can get into that can really help make this a great experience for you too. And so I hope that happens. If you have any other questions for me, feel free to put them in the comments and I'll answer to the best of my ability. Or if you just want to like share stories of like positive writer community experiences that you have had, feel free to share those. And yeah, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to me already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!